What's going on, folks? Ted from Nerd Immersion here, and we're back with more Strixhaven, a Curriculum of Chaos coverage. This time we're going to be talking about the feats, of which there are 2 included in this book. They're mostly tied to the spells and the backgrounds, and they really are very specific to this book itself, but obviously you can incorporate them or tweak and adjust them to be available in your own campaign as you see fit. Just wanted to say that if you like the coverage that I've done here, whether it be coverage for Strixhaven Curriculum of Chaos, Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, up-to-date news coverage on things, product reviews and unboxings, Kickstarters, blah, 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 all that stuff, consider subscribing to the channel. The more of you that come out here and continue to grow that number that you see right there, the happier it makes me, the more motivated it makes me to make videos, and the more suggestions folks like you can throw out in the comments that eventually lead to future video topics. So let's go ahead and jump in. By the way, there will be a link in the description as well as a pinned comment to pick up a copy of Strixhaven Curriculum of Chaos over on Amazon. If you do so, it's an affiliate link, and I do benefit slightly monetarily if you pick it up via that link. So here we go. 2 feats. Strixhaven Initiate, which is essentially Magic Initiate Plus. And I say that for 2 reasons, or really I guess just 1 reason. So the biggest downside to Magic Initiate in the player's handbook is it's a product of its time. And by that I mean, as we've seen, all newer releases that include some form of spellcasting, whether it be a feat or a race or something like that, it says you can cast this spell, for free once a long rest, once a short rest, whatever it might be, and then it will also add that extra bit of language that says, in addition, you can cast this spell using any spell slots you might have. And that is pretty great, because it means that potentially if you had some feat that gave you, I don't know, let's say you take Player's Handbook, if it had that Player's Handbook Magic Initiate, and took Cleric, and took Healing Word, or took Cure Wounds, and you take it on a Wizard, and it had that language there that says you can cast it with spell slots you have, your Wizard now has access to Cure Wounds, and they can cast it as many times as they have spell slots. So that's really cool. It adds a lot of versatility, and for the small investiture of a feat, or perhaps in some instances a racial bonus, again, and there are ways you can get feats at first level like Variant Human or Custom Lineage, so that does a lot. Strixhaven Initiate is essentially Magic Initiate, however, you're not locked in to a specific class, where Magic Initiate is pick 2 cantrips and a first level spell from a given class. Strixhaven Initiate is a little more restrictive in that the cantrips you're allowed to choose are 2 from a list of a given 3, and then the first level spell you get to pick is from one of 2 different class lists, and then again also has that benefit of being able to be cast with spell slots. So you can see right here, it says choose one of the colleges from Strixhaven: Lorehold, Prismari, Quandrix, Silverquill, or Witherbloom. You learn 2 cantrips and a first level spell based on the college you choose. You can cast the chosen first level spell without a spell slot. You must finish a long rest before you can cast it, and the language I was mentioning. You can also cast the spell using any spell slots you have. It also has the versatility, unlike the Player's Handbook Magic Initiate, which says, if I choose Druid as my Magic Initiate, then I have to use Wisdom. This gives you either the choice of Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma. You choose when you get the feat. So you could, in theory, be choosing a Cleric-based spell on a Wizard and still use your Intelligence as opposed to your Wisdom. And we can see here for Lorehold, you get 2 cantrips from the following list: Light, Sacred Flame, and Thaumaturgy, and then a first level spell from the Cleric or Wizard list. That's pretty strong. Cantrips are a little on the weaker side, but either the Cleric or the Wizard spell list is huge. Obviously, as we discussed, there's a ton of options you can do with healing and whatnot from a first level spell from the Cleric list, but also don't forget that Wizards have things like Shield, Absorb Elements, now Silvery Barbs as well. All of those are available to the Wizard, which could be something you could take with this. Prismari is 2 from Firebolt, Prestidigitation, and Ray of Frost, and a first level spell from Bard or Sorcerer. Quandrix is Druidcraft, Guidance, or Mage Hand. Choose a first level spell from the Druid or Wizard spell list. Silverquill is Sacred Flame, Thaumaturgy, and Vicious Mockery, choosing the Bard or the Cleric spell list, and Witherbloom is Chill Touch, Druidcraft, and Spare the Dying, allowing you to choose from the Druid or Wizard spell list. So that's the base chosen Strixhaven feat. I'd say probably the strongest one in my mind potentially might be Quandrix, because it does give you access to guidance. Guidance, one of being one of the best spells in the game because of its essentially spammability of usage, and how it is always in some way applicable if you're able to cast it. And the Druid and Wizard spell list, really, you're going here for the Wizard spell list, giving you access. Don't forget that Find Familiar is also on the Wizard spell list. I also like Witherbloom because I do like Chill Touch is a pretty useful spell. And it does, again, it's necrotic damage, not heavily resisted. And then once again, the Druid or Wizard list. It's nice to be able to get Vicious Mockery, potentially not on a Bard. And it does give you the Bard and Cleric spell list, some good options there. And then actually Prismari is not bad either if you're looking for straight up damage, Firebolt and Ray of Frost, or Prestidigitation. And then lastly, the secondary feat is the Strixhaven Mascot feat. Now it does have a prerequisite, which means you have to be at least 4th level and have the Strixhaven Initiate feat. And it gives you the following. You have learned to summon a Strixhaven Mascot to assist you, granting you the following benefits. You can cast the Find Familiar spell as a ritual, so again, perhaps not taking Find Familiar previously if you hadn't already. Your familiar can take the form of a mascot associated with the college that you pick. A Spirit Statue Mascot for Lorehold, an Art Elemental Mascot for Prismari, a Fractal Mascot for Quandrix, an Inkling Mascot for Silverquill, or a Pest Mascot for Witherbloom. Stat blocks are contained in this book. We'll take a quick look at them in just a sec. And when you take the attack action on your turn, you can forego one of your attacks to allow your mascot familiar to make an attack of its own with its reaction. Again, depending on the situation, this could be extremely useful or not. Right? If you're something that only has one attack a turn, you're not really sacrificing that one attack, you're sacrificing your whole action to do so. But reminder that you could be a fighter and take Strixhaven Initiate and Strixhaven Mascot. You might be looked down upon, or at least people might think it's a little weird that you are a fighter in the wizard magic or in the schools of magic. But there's nothing that says you can't, and that's actually why Wizards of the Coast went away from the Strixhaven subclasses, which were multi base class subclasses, and went in favor of these feats instead, because it doesn't alienate and ostracize things like paladins, clerics, rogues, monks, and so on. So you could, in theory, be a fighter with Strixhaven Initiate and Strixhaven Mascot, allowing you to still potentially make 2 attacks at level 11 and forgo an attack to allow your mascot to do an attack. And lastly, if your mascot is within 60 feet of you, you can teleport as an action, swapping places with the familiar. If your destination space is too small for you to occupy, the teleportation fails and is wasted. Once you teleport in this way, you can't do so again until you finish a long rest, unless you expend a spell slot of 2nd level or higher to do so again. Now, I'll remind you that it functions via the Find Familiar spell, and nowhere does it say that you need to be able to see your familiar to do that teleport swap spaces. Obviously, you could look through your familiar's eyes, because it is limited to only 60 feet, but depending on what familiar you have, and it says your familiar can take the form of the mascot. It doesn't mean it has to. So if you wanted to take an owl or a spider or what have you, you could. And this does give you the opportunity. It does say the mascot familiar, so I'm assuming it's listed as that. But the can in there makes it seem like you could, in theory, take a different form. But obviously, if you're doing this feat, you probably want to use the mascot forms. But anyway, swap spaces with it. So if it's able to sneak through to the other side of a room, you can then swap spaces, but also have it comms on what's inside by looking through your familiar's eyes before you swap places. And again, that's a freebie once a long rest, so that could, again, also work for our fighter character here, but you could use it multiple times with a 2nd level spell slot if you happen to have spells. But a reminder that you can also dissummon your familiar and then resummon them in another place within a certain distance, so there's a lot of viability and things you can do with this teleportation. So let's go ahead and do a quick, we'll open up all of these. I think you guys told me, is it Control? Control click opens these all up in different tabs. So we'll go ahead and take a look real quick at the mascots and see if any of them, obviously they're able to attack as their reaction by you foregoing one of your attacks. Let's see if one, that's worth it. But more importantly, do they have any unique means of transportation allowing you to possibly make better use of this teleport and swap spaces. So first up, we have the Spirit Statue Mascot. It's a challenge rating 1/4. Does have some decent skill proficiencies, decent hit points in armor class, so it is fairly survivable. It does have Death Burst. When it is reduced to 0 hit points, it crumbles. It returns to the afterlife. Each creature within 5 feet of it must make a DC 12 con save or take a D6 radiant damage. So, I mean, if you put it in combat, it has the potential to deal AoE burst damage, only of a D6, but still. It does have a slam attack for a D6 plus 2, which isn't bad for, a familiar, but I feel in most cases it's going to be more beneficial for you to take the attack action than to forego it for it. And it also has Council of the Past as an action. It touches one creature. Once within the next 10 minutes, that creature can roll a d4 and add the number rolled to an ability check of its choice immediately after rolling the d20. So it basically has the opportunity to twice a day. Interesting that it was listed here as twice a day and not twice per long rest, which is probably get updated in an errata in the future, because they made that early on with the monster manual. A bunch of things did say X per day, or in the player's handbook X per day, and they specifically errated those to be per long rest as opposed to per day. But essentially, yeah, it is giving you guidance, the D4 to an ability check. However, it's important to note that it is not listed as casting guidance, so it would stack with guidance or any other means of boosting things up that you might have. So, pretty cool. Again, not giving us any unique means of transportations for the swapping, and not really giving us any sort of super hard-hitting melee abilities or attacks. So I don't see, personally, the great need for this. I mean, other than the fact that it is, and it's medium size too, so it's not like it's going to be able to crawl into a place you couldn't. So let's move on to the Art Elemental Mascot. Now this one is small size, so we have that going forward. Also, the art is a lot cooler for this. This one, right out the gate, much more hardy, a little bit less armor class, less hit points, but resistance to cold and fire damage, as well as immune to poison damage and the poisoned condition. However, it does not have as many skill proficiencies. It also has a Death Burst ability. This one is a DC 11 Constitution save, or be blinded for a minute, and they can make that save at the end of their turns. But it does have some pretty sizable attacks, right? Joyful Flare is a melee attack that does 2d4 plus 1 damage. I guess that's kind of on par with a d6 plus 2, but I don't know, I like rolling more dice. But it also has a ranged attack in Melancholic Bolt, which is the same damage, 2d4 plus 1, although this is cold damage, whereas Joyful Flare is fire damage. But Melancholic Bolt is a 30-foot range, so giving your familiar, and that potentially could be useful because it does have the range. And it has Captivating Artistry once per day. Targets a creature within 30 feet. They must make a DC 12 Charisma save or be charmed for 1 minute. They can repeat the saving throw at the end of their turns. A reminder that the charmed condition, charmed creature can attack the charmer or target the charmer with harmful abilities or magical effects, and the charmer has advantage on any ability check to interact socially with that creature. So, I mean, charisma saves, not a lot of things have great charisma saves, or they can be fewer and far between. Less things, I would say, have proficiency with charisma saves. So it is only once per day, but that has a possibility to be useful. But the damage, it's elemental damage, whereas it was just bludgeoning damage for the Spirit statue. The Art Elemental one has fire and cold that potentially could allow you to circumvent resistances to bludgeoning, piercing, slashing damage. It also, again, is completely immune to the poison and poison condition. I'm sure there's situations where you could send it into a poison field and then it would be fine. It could go do things and you could have it go to the other side and then swap spaces with it. I'm a big fan of the Art Elemental Mascot, but let's see if we have anything better. We next have the Fractal Mascot. I love the art for this. It's like a fractal snake. That's awesome. Significantly more hit points. The Spirit Mascot has 26. This has 27, so that's the most HP we've seen so far, as well as an armor class of 12. Also immune to poison and the poison condition. Has relative density. The Fractal can move through creatures and objects as if they were difficult terrain. It takes damage if it moves inside, if it ends its turn inside an object. Now, it can move through, again, creatures and objects as if it was difficult terrain, which potentially the swap could be huge. If you needed to go, if you have a 15-foot thick wall that you're trapped in, your familiar in one turn with its 30-foot movement speed could move straight through that wall to the other side, and then you could swap spaces with that ability from the Strixhaven Mascot feat. It also has Quantum Strike, which does a d4 plus 1 force damage, which force damage, pretty much the least resisted damage type in the game, or 2d4 plus 1 force damage if the fractal is medium or bigger. Now, what does that mean? Let's take a look. In the bonus action, this one has bonus actions, the other ones do not. It can do Augment. The fractal's size increases by 1 size category. While the fractal is medium or bigger, it makes strength checks and strength saving throws with advantage. Its strength is only a 12, but they're at advantage, so that has the potential to do something there. And the fractal can become no larger than huge via this bonus action. So it can continue to grow in size, meaning that you can make this thing get as big as huge size as a bonus action in 3 turns time, go to medium, then large, then huge. What benefit does it have? Not a lot, honestly, because the damage only caps out at 2d4 plus 1 for medium size or bigger. But again, it is still 2d4 plus 1 damage, making the minimum damage 3. But again, the Spirit Statue Mascot's minimum damage is 3 as well. But it does have the advantage on strength checks and strength saving throws. If you have a strength weak party, that could be useful to just bank on the advantage. And you would be able to ride it because of the increased size. It doesn't have any crazy modes of movement, but either way. And lastly, we have Diminish, also as a bonus action. It decreases by 1 size category. While it is tiny, which would be using it 1 time, while it's in its normal small size configuration, it makes attack rolls, dexterity checks, and dexterity saving throws with advantage. The fractal can become no smaller than 1 foot in height via this bonus action. So there's a couple things to consider there. 1, it makes attack rolls at advantage. Now, again, at most, with a critical hit on its attack roll, it's only going to do 2d4 plus 1 damage. So the crit's not going to do anything crazy there because it, again, is doing its attack rolls. So it does say attack rolls, so I wonder if you are able to use your familiar to deliver a touch spell, as a part of the Find Familiar spell, but the touch spell is a melee attack spell. Let's go ahead and just pull up Find Familiar real quick. Let's see. When you cast a spell with a range of touch, your familiar can deliver the spell as if it had cast the spell, must be within 100 feet of you, and uses a reaction to do it. If the spell requires an attack roll, you use your attack modifier on the roll. So my thought is, if it's an attack roll, could you use the diminished ability for the Fractal Mascot to potentially roll with advantage? Because attack rolls it makes, even if they are spell attack rolls, are at advantage. For example, you could have advantage on a inflict wounds attack, I believe, which is an attack roll, and then if you hit, you could do double damage there. But also it can become tiny size, so that might allow it to slip into spaces where it normally could not, or where you normally could not, and then once again, use the ability to swap locations with it. I don't know, they probably don't all have to look like fractal snakes, but I love the art of that, so that's probably what I would do. Then we have the Inkling Mascot, which looks like literal, just animate ink. Now, here's some interesting things. 18 hit points, so decent, again, a lot better than any of the standard familiars, and a 13 armor class, so pretty decent considering it's a familiar, but this one does have a 30-foot fly speed, and it can hover. Now we're getting somewhere. With a 30-foot fly speed, we can now get to locations we could not normally obtain in a regular scenario without flight, and now it could fly up somewhere, and then we could use our teleport from the Strixhaven Mascot to swap places. That's pretty cool. It is immune to psychic damage. It does have proficiency in stealth. It also has blind sight out to 60 feet, which is pretty great, and it's also not blind beyond the blind sight, so it can see as well as using blind sight. So if you were to look through your familiar's eyes, you'd also have access to its blind sight abilities there, potentially allowing you to see invisible creatures, or allowing it to see invisible creatures it wouldn't normally. And it's immune to blinded, charmed, deafened, exhausted, and prone. A lot of condition resistances there. And the big winner right here, Amorphous, it can move through a space as narrow as 1 inch wide without squeezing. So our Inkling mascot can not only fly and hover, it can not only see invisible things via blind sight, it can also squeeze through spaces up to 1 inch wide, allowing it to be an excellent infiltration tool. Mind you, it also has a +5 on its stealth checks, allowing it to definitely get to places it normally, and we, as the player characters, could not, and then making use of that teleportation to swap spaces. It also has blocked, it a D4 +3 psychic damage. That's not bad, a D4 +3. And psychic damage is, not super resisted. It also has ink spray once per day. It sprays viscous ink at one creature within 15 feet. They need to make a DC 12 con save or be blinded. And it also has Shadow Stealth. While in dim light or darkness, it can take the hide action as a bonus action. This is your infiltration mascot. This is pretty awesome. This is, I love the look of the fractal one, and the growing and shrinking is pretty cool. But I think Inkling is the clear winner here. It provides all of the things you would want. Flight, the ability to sneak through spaces normally inaccessible by most people, high stealth skill, as well as stealth as a bonus action in dim light or darkness. It's dealing psychic damage, and a D4 +3 is pretty solid for a familiar to do so. And then again, it also has a potential blind ability, plus blind sight on top of that. And lastly, we have the Pest Mascot, which is this weird-looking sort of worm caterpillar creature. 22 hit points, 13 armor class. Nothing, it's kind of in the middle. It only has a 30-foot movement speed, a walk speed. Based on the fact that it's climbing on this branch, I do feel like it should have a 30-foot climb speed, or some kind of climb speed as well. Seems like an oversight there. This one, however, does have dark vision out to 60 feet and proficiency in perception. So the highest, I think, passive perception of all of these, as well as dark vision, so there's uses there. It can also regenerate. It regains 5 hit points at the start of the turn if it had at least 1 hit point, but it's negated if it takes any fire damage. It has Spiny Hide as well. At the start of each of its turn, the pest deals a D4 piercing damage to any creature grappling it or that it is grappling. Unfortunately, it's only for the grappling situation. If people hit it, that would be pretty useful, because then you could put it in a situation to have it give you advantage via the help action, and then if somebody went to attack it, it has decent armor class and hit points, but potentially if they were to hit it and deal damage, I think that would be cool. But, I guess you could try to have your familiar grapple them for the pure purposes of doing additional damage every turn, but it has a strength modifier of +0, so the chances of it successfully grappling something are slim to none. Especially, it's got, it looks like it should have a climb speed. It looks like it might also be able to do some sort of grapple thing with, caterpillar-like stickiness. I don't know. And then it has a bite attack that does a D4 +2 damage. That's kind of, again, in the middle there. I do feel like the Inkling mascot definitely wins out by and far with the most, out-of-combat infiltration viability. The Fractal Mascot has some interesting stuff in that it can be a pack animal in a way, because it can grow in size or shrink in size, and it can move through objects, which between the Inkling and the Fractal Mascot, they'll seem to cover your infiltration abilities. And the Art Elemental one not only has the explosion when it dies, possibly dealing a blind, it has a ton of resistances to common elemental types in cold, fire, and immunity to poison, as well as having more upfront damage with the potential to crit for 44 +1 damage, or 44 +1 cold damage with a 30-foot range, as well as a potential charm. So I do feel like ultimately the Spirit Statue Mascot it does have the nice benefit of being able to do the Council of the Past, which is once within the next 10 minutes. If it was for the next 10 minutes, they could add a D4 to an ability check they make. That would probably be a little overpowered, but twice a day, being able to give somebody the effectiveness of Guidance, which is a cantrip which you could do for free. And then again, the Pest Mascot, the regen, it has 22 hit points. I don't know if the regen's going to come up that often. Fire is super common damage type, especially in a school full of magic users. So, yeah, I think the clear winners are Art Elemental Mascot, Fractal Mascot, and Inkling Mascot. A reminder that you can gain access to these once again from the Strixhaven Mascot feat for going in one of your attacks to let them attack, and then the more important and useful ability in my mind, the ability to swap spaces if they're within 60 feet. Reminder, you don't need to be able to see them to do that swap. So there you go, folks. That is the 2 new feats contained within Strixhaven, a Curriculum of Chaos. I wanted to cover the spells and the feats first before we go and cover the backgrounds, which will be the next video, because part of those backgrounds is that they give you the Strixhaven Initiate feat. So I wanted to lay the groundwork to tell you what it gives you first before we talk about what the backgrounds actually do. So backgrounds will be the next video, followed by magic items after that. Let me know what you think. Do you like these feats? I kind of like the concept of the feat trees. It's more of a feat line. There's not really a branch to go off of here. But I like these. I know a lot of people don't like them. I enjoy them because it does harken back to older editions, which does give me some sentimentality there and nostalgia. But it was nice to be able to, if I wanted to invest in a thing, I could go down a direction if I wanted to. I can take this Strixhaven Initiate feat, and then I can take the Strixhaven Mascot feat, and I can kind of build stuff out. Like I said, it's also nice because this could give those interesting, usable, actions and different things to some character like a fighter or a rogue or something that wouldn't normally have access to those. Getting familiar on anybody is useful because familiars have no limit to the number of uses they could have, whether in combat or, as a lot of these ones will show, out of combat. And I think I don't know, again, people may have issues with it, but I think it does set an interesting precedent as a potential for what the future could hold. Will we see things like this in the future? These sort of take this feat and then take it allows you to have a prerequisite that requires the previous feat, and then you could do that. Again, we have seen some feats that require prerequisites, like any of the armor-based feats require you to have proficiency with the armor. But I don't think we've ever really, I could be wrong, but I don't think we've ever had anything where the prerequisite was you had a previous feat to get this new feat. I also like this because this does open up the options for folks who like to homebrew and get an idea of, hey, this is what Wizards of the Coast is thinking when they're doing these kind of tree or line-based feat, that you can follow along. Maybe I can use this to inspire my own homebrew feats or tweak Strixhaven Initiate and Strixhaven Mascot to fit the magical school or academy or monastery or what have you in your own world. So that's how I'm looking at it. It's definitely a lot of inspiration for homebrewing and your own homebrew worlds, or just tweaking to fit into the existing setting that you're using. Or again, if you're playing Strixhaven Curriculum of Chaos, you can just use them as they are. So anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.